Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 750,000 times in over 160 countries and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jules Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
The Te Araroa is New Zealand's longest hiking trail, traversing the length of the North and South Islands for a distance of around 3,000 kilometres. In late 2019, in episode 124, we interviewed musicians Mickey and Michelle just before they set out on their epic 3,000-kilometre journey on this amazing trail. Their experience was a bit different than most, as they planned to continue working as musicians as they went. COVID interrupted their trip, and now a little over 3 years later, they have completed their journey. In this episode, we catch up with them to find out about their experience and what they thought of New Zealand's longest hiking trail. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Mickey, Michelle, welcome back to the Australian Hiker Podcast to talk about this amazing trip.
Great to be back.
Now, before we talk about your hike, it's been a little over 3 years, so just give us a brief reintroduction to yourself, your involvement in hiking, and also your music background as well.
Okay. Yeah. We're both full-time musicians. Michelle plays the harp, I play the fiddle and sing. We've played in, a lot of different bands, but we started this duo with the idea of doing the Te Araroa Trail in New Zealand.
Back in 2019.
Yes.
We didn't realise it would take 3 and a bit years to complete. But it's been quite a journey with COVID right in the middle.
Yeah. And so in September 2019, we started hiking the trail, and we were playing gigs along the way. So we brought our instruments with us, and we would get them shipped from gig to gig, and we would walk to each venue and play. So the first time, we did something like 20 gigs and 2,500 kilometres. So we started at the north and hiked south.
A fair chunk. It's a 3,000-kilometre trail, so we did the majority.
Yeah, and then obviously COVID came, and
that was an interesting time. Everyone's got their COVID stories of where they were at that time, and we were actually in the bush, of course. We had 5 days of no reception, and it was quite blissful, to be honest.
Yeah,
and we'd heard of this, this thing, it's flu-esque.
Yeah, COVID was
going
like
around
this
in the northern hemisphere, and we popped out of those 5 days. We got reception, and it was a whole different world, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was quite amazing, actually. And we sort of decided to go for the airport and try and get home, which we did.
All right. Now we'll talk about the trail and your previous journey in a moment, but what made you decide to do the trail in the first place?
I think that was me.
Yeah.
I'd done the Australian Alps walking track, which is a 6-week hike in Australia, and that at the time felt like the biggest thing in the world, and it is huge. But once I'd done that, I was like, fantastic, amazing, something bigger. And it just sort of showed up, the Te Araroa Trail, length in New Zealand. And although it was, it's a lot longer, it's quite a well set up hike, unlike the Australian Alps walking track. So that I found that appealing because it was a lot more hiking, and I'd already done so much kind of prep for the Australian Alps. And it was basically, the whole music thing happened because when I told Mickey that I wanted to do this trial, he's like, "Oh, cool. I don't want to spend 6 months away from playing music."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, okay. Apparently I'm fine to spend 6 months away from playing music," although I thought I was at the time. So then sort of went away and had to think about that, and then came back with this idea. How would you feel about, what if we did gigs along the way? Which all sounded very grand, and then we had to figure out how we're actually going to do that. But that seemed to get you enticed, didn't it, Mickey?
Yeah. Look, I play my violin a lot of hours of the day, and although I really do love hiking a lot, 6 months was
It's a long time.
a long time. So at first I was considering just doing the second half, but then Michelle had this idea, and it just sort of I jumped at it like I was really keen, and
you were very keen.
it just sort of worked.
But as was saying, we didn't actually play together before then as a band. So then it became about actually our prep for the hike was actually trying to make a band and an album and not so much actual hiking prep.
Now, I think for those that didn't already listen to episode 124, Michelle actually plays a harp, which is probably just a tiny bit big to carry with you on your hikes.
Just a little.
Just a little. And again, I think even though a violin's a bit smaller, it's probably not the sort of instrument you can stuff into a backpack. So,
I'm vaguely considering in the future about like getting a cheap one and a small case. Like, I think it could be done, but no, the harp is another
the harp
challenge.
is such a deal breaker. Like, we definitely have seen, like ukuleles and violins not dissimilar. Like you're saying, maybe a bit more delicate or more expensive than ukulele, but you could get a cheap one and do that. But the harp is a big problem. We did not carry them. Some people were imagining that we were, and that didn't. Well, I mean, look, there was times where we carried them, but not for very long.
Yeah.
We actually, in order to get them shipped around the country, we actually just asked people at our gigs if anyone was going to the next location. Which we didn't.
Always was.
Yeah, someone always was. We didn't really know how that was going to turn out, did we? We had a plan B, which is where we would take the instruments to where they need to be next, and then we would. I guess kind of hitch back. Yeah, and then walk. We never had to do that. We always just asked our audience, and it worked.
Yeah, we generally play 2 sets, and in the break in between the first one, we say, hey, if anyone's going to the next destination, like in the next 2 weeks, because it might take us, 2 weeks or 3 weeks to walk the next 300 kilometres, and it's a 3-hour drive for them. So someone would always stick their hands up. We'd give them our instruments, and off we go. And it worked every single time,
amazing.
like without any drama.
Yeah,
that's
cool.
that's very trusting of you.
Yeah,
that's what a lot of people say.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, these are people who have, paid to come to a folk gig.
Yeah.
So I feel like they're fairly trusting people. They're paid to be there. They want to see us. I mean, it is. Our instruments they would be hard to try and sell.
If you stole them.
I think mine would be one of the only types of that harp in the country.
I was going to say there's not much of a black market for harps, is there?
I hope not. I don't think so.
Checking out the dark web.
I hope not. But look, it is like we did have to sort of word people up just about being, careful. A big one is sun. Actually.
Yeah, don't leave them in the sun or in the car.
Yeah, it's like a dog.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to the music side of things, you're also I think you were looking at doing this as a fundraiser at some stage. Tell us a bit about that.
Oh.
Yeah. We were fundraising and also just awareness generally for osteoporosis, which is something I was diagnosed with. It was like a while ago now. I think I was 23, 24. And it was one of the things that got me into hiking was just general bone health. Because weight bearing and exercise, carrying your pack around up and down mountains is quite good for your bones. So that sort of got me into hiking. And so, we looked at doing a little bit of awareness and fundraising, which was really great, actually. We would also talk about it at our gigs, and I'd always have people come up to me afterwards and tell me their story. And it was sort of nice to kind of get it out there a bit. I feel like it's one of those sort of conditions that people sort of tend to hide away a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think also, I mean, it's a condition you tend to associate with old age. So being diagnosed at 23, I mean, before talking to you, I don't think I'd ever considered someone your age of ever getting osteoporosis.
Yeah, it's an awareness thing. Like I'm working actually with Osteoporosis Australia, now known as Healthy Bones Australia, because prevention and early diagnosis is it's rare to have an early diagnosis. It's not that people don't have it; it's that they don't know, because aspects of it is a silent disease before you have like a fragility fracture, basically.
Yeah.
So it's there, but it's not that well known about, I suppose.
Now getting back onto the hike again. Now, what date did you actually start the original hike?
The 29th of September, 2019. And I don't know if you remember or not, but I actually started without Mickey, because he had a broken toe.
Yeah.
He doesn't have osteoporosis.
No.
He's the one that broke a toe. 4 weeks before we started.
We're due to start.
We're due to start. And because we had gigs booked, we decided that I would start, and he joined me 2 weeks 2 weeks afterwards, which meant that it was 6 weeks to the day after his broken toe.
Yeah.
That he started.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what a broken toe can do. It's such a tiny little bone, but it's probably one of the more painful ones to.
And I broke it good.
Broke it very well. Did a good job.
Yeah, no, my wife Jill's done that, and again, it just it's like, okay, well that's it. Walk as little as you can, but definitely no hiking. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're training so hard before it as well. Like every second day we're doing like weights and running and things. And then I just had 6 weeks of sitting still in a boot.
Not ideal, but it worked.
Yeah.
All right. So now, again, getting back to the original hike, when had you planned on finishing that hike? Because I think you ended up finishing roughly 2 or 3 weeks off early because of COVID. Was that the case?
Yeah. I think we'd actually planned. So we had to fly out on the 24th of March.
Yeah.
I think we'd planned to finish around April, but remember that we're very slow because we keep stopping for gigs. So I think we only had 420 kilometres left. And I think that's roughly about sort of 20 days.
Yeah.
Because it's flattish in areas. But we had some gigs we were stopping for. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to say mid-March.
Okay. Yeah. Which was pretty much when the pandemic hit just about everybody. So it sounds about the right sort of date. And I know certainly being in Australia, it was like, not a problem, then, it's a problem. We need to do something quickly. So,
exactly.
Yeah, I think, as you say, being out bush and being out off radio contact for that sort of a period, it went from being no issue to being a major issue, and everything happened very quickly. So, it would have been a short, sharp turnaround for you guys to try and get back to Australia before you ended up staying in New Zealand for a number of months.
Exactly.
Yeah, which we considered. We had 2 offers from some friends we'd made along the way, and they were both really good ones. We were really, really considering, but then we just happened to find this flight, like a really last-minute flight, that was...
It was so unknown, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We just went, okay,
and so we're like, you know what, we should be near our family, or... Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Now, in relation to the logistics, ignoring the COVID interruption, how many days did you actually spend on trail doing this walk?
Oh, great question.
That's a good one. This is hard because we would stop and we would take off like 4 days or so and play a gig. So, that was sort of, I guess, our rest days.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
We didn't really have rest days on trail very much.
Not particularly.
Unless we were playing. So
that was our rest days, I guess. It's kind of... I feel like without gigs and COVID, I feel like maybe 5 months.
Okay.
That's what we would walk around.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So sorry, I was going to say that's roughly around about 20 kilometres a day by the sound of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Definitely.
Like, we're certainly not ultralight, bullets.
No.
But we're not slow either. I think we're pretty average. Like, 20 Ks a day feels pretty fair.
What that means on TA, probably like lots of hikes, is that you're going to have areas that are very flat that you do need to do 30, and then you're going to have ones that are really mountainous where you kind of do 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the mountains in New Zealand are slightly higher than what we're used to over here. So
pointy.
Very pointy.
Now, from memory, you started in the north and headed south. Why did you pick that direction?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons, but one of them is just sort of the time frame worked best for us. Like, so if you go north to south, you can start a little earlier because they ask you not to go before September because it's lambing season, and in the North Island you walk through a lot of farms.
Okay.
Whereas if you walk north to south, south to north, we call it Nobo and Sobo, like northbound, southbound. If you're heading north, you have to start later because of the snow. So, like, you head to a bunch of really high altitude snowy areas, so you need that time to melt.
Yeah, there isn't that much too high in the North Island, is there? So you're not really waiting for any sort of weather snow to melt in the North Island.
Yeah.
So you can start earlier.
And I think the other thing is also that everything we'd read said the majority of the people go southbound, and we're sheep, so we want to follow in the footsteps of everyone.
Another thing to me was that when I did the Australian Alps walking track, I went north, and that means that the sort of hardest terrain was first.
Yeah.
And I really kind of hurt my knees on that, and then like healed over the sort of flatter terrain. So I was like, if we're going, what about making the easier terrain first?
Yeah, so it's commonly known that the North Island is a lot easier than the South. It's just a lot flatter.
So you get your legs, you spend the whole North Island pretty much getting your legs ready. And then you hit the South Island. It's like, okay, I've done 3 months of hiking. I'm ready for this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think that sounds reasonable. I must admit, I was aware of the snow. I wasn't aware of the lambing season. I hadn't even considered something like that. But as you said, it's walking through people's farms. It's going to be an issue. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So take us through the trip itself. What did a typical day on trail look like?
That's such a cool question because that was a very politician answer, wasn't it? Interesting question. Thank you. It really does depend. So like we mentioned before, the North Island is a lot like mostly farms, I would say.
Yeah, there's not as many sort of national parks, are there?
No. Sorry, and that's not to say there aren't any. There's definitely some.
Sorry, where the trail goes through too.
Yeah, but like the majority of the first half of the North Island, like you're walking through farms almost every day. Some days you're even walking along a road for the whole day, which is devastating. But then once you get sort of halfway through the South Island, North Island, what is wrong with me? Once you get halfway through the North Island, that's when you start going through bush tracks, which are pretty similar to what you might expect in Australia. And then the mountains start coming in. And the difference, I would say, if you're an Australian hiker, is that everything is just generally wetter. So, like, many days you're walking through a river, like along through a river, like that's just the trail, or else you cross the same river, 7 to 12 times in a day, and that's just what you do. So, like...
Yeah, wet feet the whole time.
And
we'd never experienced that before.
No, it was flabbergasting. And then once you get to the South Island... everything gets pointy. Like if you look at the elevation map of the South Island, it's just like a stegosaurus's back. Like it's so pointy. And even then, like you're climbing through really dry, like scree, what we call like loose sort of rock on top of the mountain.
Rock on rock.
And that's like crumbling, and then you get down, so it feels really dry, but then all of a sudden there's a river like on top of this mountain that you're wading through. Like it's a real like Jurassic World, like it feels very old.
No, I was going to say, in some respects, it sounds very much like Tasmanian hiking, at least in some areas of the island. Because I know, having lived in New Zealand for a couple of years, it's sort of some of it. Certainly, the western half of the North Island is very much like rural New South Wales, but the eastern side is very different again. So it doesn't surprise me that you'd get a bit of variation. But I must admit, I wasn't actually thinking about river crossings and things like that. But it's good to know.
Yeah, it's actually a big, I think, I don't know if it's a big debate or not, but a lot of what shoes you wear on this hike is a bit of a thing, because you do end up with wet feet for so much of it. And like we were wearing trail runners the whole time. That was fine.
Yeah.
But it just means that then like you just walk straight into the water with them essentially, and then you walk 3Ks in the water with them, and then they dry off and you get out, and it just means you don't have to swap things over or kind of just don't worry about it really. If you're okay, like you just get used to having wet feet.
Yeah,
pretty much.
I must admit, I was going to say, I must admit, I've just done the South Coast track in Tasmania, and I took an extra pair of socks, but really to get dry feet on that track, you'd have to take 3 pairs of socks a day. And it's just one of those trails you expect to have wet feet, and that's just the way it is. So this sounds very similar in that respect.
Mm-hmm. I'd say so.
All right. Now, what about accommodation? Were you tenting it? Were you doing homestays or staying in motels? What's the typical process of homestay or of accommodation?
That's a good question. So North Island, quite a few caravan parks, I would say, is the saying. There's less national parks, and you've actually, because New Zealand does have a lot of huts, but not really that many in the North Island. In fact, I think we walked a month or so before we got to our first hike, maybe even longer.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So, a lot of caravan park's actually quite expensive, I would say.
Yeah, it was. It took us by surprise.
Yeah, it did. We sort of knew that, but yeah. And then as you get a bit further down North Island, there are sort of some huts that start popping up, which is really nice. Another big thing is trail angels, which you can find on various ways, but there's a Facebook group for them, which are, really, really helpful. People who just open up their home or their front lawn or something to have you, to stay the night, or sometimes for free, but often for a koha, which is just Māori for a donation. And these people are really lovely, people who, like hikers and like hearing stories and that kind of thing. So very helpful if, say the caravan park is full, or you just, it's sort of a nicer experience, isn't it, staying with locals than it is. For me, I find, rather than the caravan parks. But in the South Island, much more huts or wild camping, I suppose, or both.
Okay.
So you have a tent the whole time. The whole hike. You completely self-contain the whole hike. And then there's, varying options. There are some sort of trail angels things, because you do roll into towns and there's caravan parks or trail angels.
Yeah, generally the South Island, you walk through the middle of the country, which is just in generally less populated. Yeah. So like at various points you actually have to hitch out of the trail to restock on food. Yeah. So there's definitely less trail angel action, but and more wilderness and all of that. Yeah, and I can't remember if we mentioned it, but we had you buy like a hut pass for 6 months. Yeah, 6 months or a year. And that was like $100 or $90 or something like that. But yeah, it makes its money back pretty quickly, because I think you're supposed to spend like $5 each per hut per night.
Yeah.
The backcountry. They have a few different grades of huts in New Zealand. Yeah, and the trail goes on a few different ones. There's a couple of times that it crosses the Great Walks is what they call them. How many did we figure out? There's under 10 of those. There's about 10. Yeah, I think it actually crosses like maybe 3 of them or something like that. So you do have to watch out for those ones, because you do have to pre-book those ones. But the other sort of huts are kind of like, fancy Australian huts. Oh, they put Australian huts to shame, I'm afraid. But yeah, that the backcountry hut pass, yeah, like they're maintained. They'll have toilet, a drop toilet. Mattresses. Ooh. Like we stayed at one that had a gas oven. Yeah, well, that's unusual. Yeah, but and so us as Australians, we were like so blown away, and then all the Europeans and Americans were like, these huts are terrible, and it's like, oh, guys, do not come to Australia. We love our Australian huts. We love them.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. It's sort of, particularly in Europe, but normally what they're thinking about, and particularly in some of the ones in New Zealand, these huts are designed to be used in snow conditions. More so in Europe, but in New Zealand, in Australia, we don't think about that as much. Particularly in Australia, they tend to be emergency huts rather than things you book at and stay at. So, yeah. Now, what time of the morning did you typically start on each day? Did you have a time you tried to get away at? Yeah, I'm not the best at rising early, but we definitely got into a habit of sort of getting up at 6 or maybe sometimes even a little bit before, and then leaving within the hour of waking up. About 7. Pack up the tent and breakfast. We'd always try to be on the road by 7. Sometimes we're a little bit carefree, especially like in the summer months where you've got more sunlight. You can afford to be a little bit more lax. South of the South Island, it doesn't get it's dark at like 10:30. Yeah. It's sort of wild. So not that we want to walk for 14 hours a day, but if you did want to, you could. Honestly, some people did. I know. But yeah, we would generally be on the road by 7. Do somewhere between 7 and 12 hours of walking a day. Yeah. I think in general, depending on the terrain. And then, hopefully get in by 4, 5, 6, 7. I must admit, I'm one of these people. If it's light, I can't just. It's okay if it's going to be. It's light. It's going to be dark in 10 minutes. But if it's light and you've still got 3 or 4 hours to go, I've got to be walking. Right. I think if it was me, I'd probably end up doing 14-hour days. And we both have eye masks. Yep. Because if we want to go to bed at 8 p.m, that means that we can actually get to sleep. Yeah, because the sun's still up. So I think that we found that we were generally sort of in bed by 8 to 9 p.m. and it's completely light, so that really helped us to deal with that. We call 8 p.m. hikers midnight, and if you stay up past midnight, you're being really naughty. Yeah, no, I must admit, on the South Coast track that I did, I didn't go to bed and on one night until after 10 o'clock, and I've never done that before. So yeah. Now, you talked a bit about food before, but what was your resupply strategy? Were you picking up food from designated towns, or were you sending boxes ahead of yourself? What were you doing there?
Bit of both, actually. North Island, yet again, you can come into a town every couple of days in some sections. We would do about 5 days because we couldn't be bothered sort of resupplying or going to shops that much. We'd rather walk past some of them. And we're sort of pretty comfy to carry 5 days. So we would do that. So, yeah, walk straight into the supermarket and resupply. There was a couple of longer stretches in the North Island. We did 7 days on the Wanganui River, and that was, so we did 7 days resupply there. So it was a couple of longer stretches. But in the South Island, we posted 27 days ahead of us, which is pretty standard. You don't have to do that. You've got, depending obviously how fast you walk, you're sort of doing a week, aren't you, Mickey?
I think
you restock a week and then you restock
3 restocks. Is that right? Was
something like that?
I can't remember.
But you're only in a tiny little town that doesn't have a proper supermarket. Like, it just has, the gas station is everything.
Petrol station, yeah.
Yeah, with only a couple of little things. So it would be a very expensive resupply with very limited things. Or people hitch out at those points if they want to and resupply. But just to save us time, we posted everything from Wellington, which is the bottom of the North Island. So that 27 days ahead of us, we posted it down to the South Island to various areas. And that was great.
Yeah.
And that was nice because that sort of month was like the most sort of wildernessy experience, wasn't it? Because it didn't, you had a little town that you rolled into, but there wasn't much there, and then you kept going. You got your food box and kept going.
And it was sort of like the North Island is so much more populated, and like the way that the trail works, like you're either walking through, like farms, like we mentioned earlier, into towns and cities regularly, and then all of a sudden it's like boom, you're in the South Island, you posted 27 days of food. Like, you're not going to see anyone. And then that's when the mountains really kick in. So it was this big contrast.
Yeah, it was nice contrast, wasn't it?
All right. Now, what about water? I'm imagining that water would be readily available, more so in the South Island, I suppose, but even in the North Island?
Everywhere.
We still don't. Like, we're so Australian in our way of thinking about water that we are quite conservative in that we tend to carry a lot that we don't actually need because we've been burnt here before,
Yeah.
And it's not something you want to do without. So pretty much everyone without fail, because he carries his bottles on the outside of his pack, will go, whoa, you're carrying a lot of water.
And every person we see, especially, hey, that's a lot of water. I'm like, should I be right? And because I think once or twice in Australia, we've sort of run out of water maybe 2 hours before.
Or had to be conservative with it, which is just not nice.
It just sucks. And then we're like, we carry, we have the ability to carry 3 litres each, and then we also have a bladder with another 4 litres that we can take. And so our 3 litres are always full. And I've got my water on the front of my pack, so everyone can see these 3 litres. And then we're seeing people carrying like a 1 litre, like little bottle.
Which you can do.
You can do, I would.
One area, I would say, probably the Richmond Ranges, that is a dry area that some people got in trouble with if they were only carrying 1 litre. But otherwise, you can carry small. You just have to refill all the time, and whatever kind of filtering system, if you want to filter, whatever filtering system you have, you just need to use that all the time, I suppose. We tend to use one filtering system, like we filter our water at night time or in the morning, and then we have it done for the day. So I guess that means that we carry a bit more. Yeah,
and I got to admit, you don't feel very smart when you're lugging your pack around. You've added 3 kilos of water to it, and you're walking next to a river for the next 2 hours. Yeah, like, what am I doing?
We would dump sometimes, but yeah. There is a lot of water.
I must admit, I'm a bit in your camp. I prefer to filter once, and if I have to stop and keep on topping up a litre every few hours and filter it, that'd just drive me insane. I'd rather carry it. So, but 3 litres will probably do me for a day, I think. But prefer to filter once. So.
Yes, we agree.
Yeah.
Now, while I used to live in New Zealand, I haven't done a lot of hiking over there. So, in relation to the landscapes from north to south, can you build us a bit of a picture about the style or the types of landscapes that you're walking through?
Well, you start on a beach, 100 k's or so on the from Cape Reinga Beach, and that's the first bit. Actually, the first day is really lovely. You kind of go up and down like the escarpment and in and out of sort of, you know, kind of beach shrubby bushes and stuff. But then you hit just like, I think it's 90. I can't even remember how many kilometres just on a flat, straight beach, and that's a bit painful, I found personally. But then you're straight into a muddy forest after like 4 days.
Yeah.
So I think you do a fair bit of beach hiking, mostly on the North Island, a little bit at the end of the South Island.
Yeah.
So North Island is beach, muddy forests,
rolling fields, so many of them,
and then
bush tracks.
Yeah, bush tracks. Some like kind of volcanic sort of stuff because you go up and over the Tongariro crossing and Wanganui. So
yeah, we probably mentioned this before.
Yeah,
but
canoeing.
The Wanganui River, you canoe. You can either do something like 170 or 250 kilometres, and that just means 5 days or 7 days.
Yeah.
We did the 7 days, and it was the best.
It was really fun.
Really, really beautiful.
Yeah. It's such a nice change. You know, you've been on your feet for like 2 months at that point or something, and suddenly you've got to use your arms.
Yeah.
Very small at that point.
And you hear about some hardcore people who just walk like the trail next to it because, you know, they want to walk every step of this trail, and it's just like, I can't imagine skipping. It's like, it's a total highlight of the whole thing. Like,
yeah.
So awesome.
That's fun. And then you've got at the end of if you're going south, at the end of the North Island, you come across the Tararua Ranges, which is just after Palmerston North, kind of sort of coming into Wellington.
On the way into Wellington.
And they're
brutal.
Yeah, they're brutal, and they're the first real kind of mountain range that you come across in the North Island, and very up and down. Even though maybe they're not the highest mountains in the world, it doesn't matter.
They're so steep, though.
They're so steep, yeah. And that's great because that really kind of gets you ready for the South Island, I think.
Yeah, they were like the first time we had to start doing plus 10-hour days, I think, like 10, 11, even 12.
Yeah, we did.
They were really, really hard. And like astonishingly beautiful, but just like
they were great.
Very steep.
They were lovely. So that's kind of North Island. Things obviously in the South Island, it's just high mountains. Suddenly you're getting scree and rock on top and absolutely amazing views. Some areas a bit drier, like say in the Richmond Ranges, suddenly there's lots of rock. It actually, some of it, we've hiked the Larapinta, and some of that actually reminded me of Larapinta, you know, in Alice Springs.
Yeah.
And but all of the rivers are running, which is such a contrast. And then you're into like sort of more muddy forest sometimes.
Muddy forest, like or even sort of dry forest tracks, like, and then sort of really big plains as well, like the middle of the South Island, like around the Methven area. Yeah,
because the Te Araroa Trail, you know, it's a hiking trail, and New Zealand down the centre has like technical mountains that are, you know, like 3,000, which you don't go up. You go to either side of them. Sometimes, I think a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time you're sort of on the eastern side of them, which is where it's going to be drier. But I think sometimes you cross over to the western side, didn't we?
Yeah.
And that's when suddenly it's a lot wetter, and like there's way more things like sandflies and just general mud and that kind of stuff. So you're sort of getting a bit of both depending on which side of those mountains you're on.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And then one of my favourite days was the day before coming into Lake Hawea. So this is around like the 2,400 kilometre mark or something.
Actually before we got stopped the first time.
Yeah. You're walking through a river the whole day, and like, you know, sort of hip height river, and you just go down it. Like, it's so amazing. And of course it's New Zealand, so it's crystal clear blue water.
Amazing water. The colour is, I never seen anything
so
like it.
Awesome.
I guess there's lots of sort of glacial things there, aren't there? We're just so different to here.
So I guess what I'm getting at is it's a very varied path.
It is. It's really varied. Yeah.
And then like the last day that we did, so like walking into Bluff, you know, like here's the end. You walk along a highway for 17 kilometres that day. So we go to, some people like really push themselves because they're ready to finish and do, you know, massive like 50, 70, 80 kilometre days. But we kept it to a general 34. And even then, 17 k's on the highway just destroyed me. Like,
it doesn't matter if you can do it fast.
It doesn't matter. And like, we only had one pack between us, and I was still just like, just kill me. But getting to the end was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, fortunately, the last little bit of the South Island, you go back into kind of bush stuff. So but there is a highway for a bit.
Yeah, I think that's one of the criticisms of the Te Araroa. It's sort of I think that they're still trying to get rid of the road walking, but you know, it's better off to get the trail up and going, and then then work on trying to make the trail more natural in areas that you can. But it's a slow process that'll take a few years to get sorted.
It's a huge.
Yeah, and the team do such great work.
Good work.
I think, as far as I know, I think that it's currently 15% road walking, and they're trying to get it down to 10. Like, that's their big goal.
Well, actually, that last bit we're talking about, like, we're complaining because it was a road walk. It's actually, they've built an amazing side walk, so you're not actually even on the highway.
That's true.
Which, still it's not nice walking next to a highway, but it's even better not to walk actually on the highway. So, they are spending money where they can on those places, which is great.
Now, you mentioned muddy forests. Were you wearing gaiters at all, or what? You just put up with the mud?
Yeah, look. There's a point where they don't.
They went over the gaiters. Yes, we do have. And they're up to just below our knees, but sometimes it went up and over to me.
Yeah, I love my gaiters as well. And again, kind of like the boots thing, it seems they're going out of style a little bit, like lots of people.
Oh, yeah, they have snakes there as well.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Mickey wears his a fair bit. He's also quite a bit allergic to
actually,
grasses.
That's a good one. Since we came back, like the first time, walked through the bush, fine. This time, walk through a couple of thistles, and then my legs just swell up like so badly. And yeah, it looks like I'm having some sort of, I guess I am having some sort of allergic reaction or something, but it just looks like I'm about to die. So I was pretty diligent with my gaiters this time, and also we just like them because it means less sunscreen and stuff like that. But yeah, what Michelle's talking about is there's just towards the end there's this place called the Longwood Forest that typically takes 2 days. Some hardcore people can do it in one, but it's 2 days of pretty intense mud. So like there were times when it was like well above knee deep. And there's sort of no way around it. Like
really
you just
what
gotta,
you're wearing at that point.
And that day is like a 10 or 11 hour day, and you just sort of you slog through it, and then you get to the camp, and there's no real running water source, so you take those muddy things off, and then you put them on again the next day, and you keep going. It's pretty grueling.
Yeah. But yeah, we are gaiter wearers, definitely, and especially in Australia.
Oh, love my gaiters.
Yeah.
What about animals? So, I mean, obviously, if you're walking through farms, you're getting farm animals. As you mentioned, there are no snakes in New Zealand. So, what were you seeing in relation to wildlife over there?
Lots of birds.
Yeah, birds.
That's their main. Yeah, besides introduced species, it's mainly birds, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of tuis. We actually didn't get to see a kiwi. We heard them, but we didn't see one. Weckers, another little
cheeky bird.
Flightless. Yeah, cheeky bird. But yeah, mostly birds. You'll see some deer.
Like wild.
Yeah, they've got
lots of goats.
Yeah, wild goats. There's sort of feral ones. So feral species that are introduced there. Some stoats kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like you say, yeah, cows and sheep.
Hedgehogs.
Oh yeah, there are
which
hedgehogs.
are very cute, but unfortunately do a lot of damage, and they're hated by the locals. Also, the possums.
Australian possums.
So we introduced the possum at some point, not me and Michelle, but at some point, and they have just spread like wildfire. Everyone hates them, and it's just like, again, they're so adorable, but they're doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, because they don't have any predators there, sort of thing, and there's lots of beautiful bird life there, which is why it can flourish in the past, because it hasn't been predators. But yeah, things like the possums, they eat their eggs and that sort of stuff. But anyways, yeah, so mostly birds are the native, isn't it? I believe they have some native bats and stuff too, but I don't know if we saw any bats.
Yeah, like you're not going to see some sort of great New Zealander beast, roaming the hills. There just isn't one.
Yeah.
No.
I'll go through to the highlights and the lowlights of the trip, and we'll start off with the lowlights. What was the thing you could have done without on this trip?
Oh, sandflies.
Yes, hard to go past sandflies.
Do we have sandflies in Australia? Because we hadn't experienced them before.
We do in some areas, but they tend to be very localised, right? And not so much over on this the east coast. It's but it tends to be. It does tend to be very localised, and when you get them, you get them. But it's something we typically aren't used to. Were you wearing? I was going to say, were you wearing long pants and long sleeves, or short pants and short sleeves?
Shorts and gaiters, so you've got your knee gap.
Yeah.
And then we wear long sleeve shirts. But yeah, they just
any exposed skin.
They can be quite intense in areas, aren't they?
Yeah, and of course they're always in the most beautiful areas. Like sometimes where they are is wherever you want to stop for lunch is where they're hiding. And And it doesn't serve you well to go on about them, but like sometimes like
No, you need to just move on, don't you?
Yeah, it was just such a shame. Like like I heard it a couple of times that there were like Maori stories about like, you know, the powers that be putting sandflies in to stop a really beautiful place from becoming overrun by people. Which it totally works. Like, yeah, like the most astonishing mountains and rivers and things just swarming.
You can with the sandflies, what we found, you can either completely cover up. So I would sometimes even put my gloves on, and it's too hot, but I've got my gloves on and everything on so that they can't bite me. Or keep moving. That's kind of like the main thing. The two options. You can set up the tent and get in the tent, and they'll all be in the tent, but then you can kill them all, and then you'll have a nice night. But yeah, they're quite. And also, I think we're also not used to them. Like our bodies aren't used to them, right? So we get quite a reaction. I think some people do it as well in New Zealand, but yeah.
It seemed like the locals were better suited to them.
I think so. Yeah. So they're a low light.
All right. Now, going on to the highlight, what was the couple of key things that you thought were just amazing?
Yeah, there are just so many.
Keys, Mickey.
Yeah, the keys. The obvious one is the people. Like, and especially like because we were playing music, I think we had a probably more intimate experience with the.
Yeah, but you can anyway.
You totally can.
With so many lovely people who open their doors to have you stay, you know, as a hiker.
Yeah.
And fantastic people that we met.
Yeah.
And also hikers.
And some of our European friends who were hiking got stuck here throughout COVID and like stayed with really lovely people, had a really great time. Like it was really heartwarming to hear stuff like that. And, you know, like you say, like at our gigs we'd say, hey, like we've come through, you know, this mountain range to get to this gig, and like half the people at the gig have been through that mountain range and they want to talk about it. Like it was really, really incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then of course the other obvious ones are like all the ridiculously beautiful locations.
Yeah. In terms of like favourite locations, I think Nelson Lakes have both decided that.
Nelson Lakes is just so pretty.
Yeah. Up and down, of course, lots of mountains. It's sort of like maybe the third week of the South Island as you're heading south.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it's comparable. Like it's probably comparable to something in Tassie, but like I'm trying to think about the Australian Alps or I don't know. Yeah. It's like it's Kosciuszko-esque, but
with massive mountains.
But just massive ones. Another great one, we probably mentioned this last time we spoke to you, is from Twizel to Tekapo, or Tekapo to Twizel. Yeah. You're not allowed to camp for like something like 48 kilometers. So once again, the hardcore people will just walk 48 Ks. But like people have set up like rent a bike systems where you hire the bike, you ride to the thing, and they take your pack for you. So like you just have this beautiful day riding past Mount Hauraki / Mount Cook. And we happen to get really beautiful weather, and it was just like so pretty.
It was like the Wanganui River. It was sort of really fun, just sort of change your speed of travel. You know, it's like walking is its own beautiful speed. It's quite slow. And suddenly for one day, you know, you're doing something quite different. And it was really nice to ride a bike through, you know, that one day. And it's just, really enjoyable aspects like that, hey?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what advice would you offer to people that are looking at doing this trail?
Ooh.
Don't plan it around a pandemic.
Yep, that one works.
I think, we like to take our time, as you can probably see.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said for not planning too far ahead and taking your time. Like, for example, we did meet some people who were, they'll book so much stuff ahead, months and months ahead kind of thing. And look, maybe I've never done that, I suppose, but we found that we had booked things ahead because we booked gigs ahead, but we'd also given ourselves so much time that when someone goes, oh, hey, there's this really cool side trip, we go, great, and we go off and do it. So we can take opportunities as they arise and be kind of spontaneous. So I feel like more time than you might think that you need is if like, time can be a luxury, I know, but if that's possible, I'd really recommend that.
Yeah. That's a really good one. I'm just thinking like more specifically, I've heard stats like 90% of the people go south and obviously 10 go north. So like depending on how surrounded by people you want to be, that would be a good one to sort of figure out.
Yeah. So like, yeah, you can. I mean, look, we don't actually know the stats from this year because I think this season, I suppose, they've had the most people they've ever had because, of course, so many people wanted to do it in the last couple of years and then they've had to defer it, and so you've got a whole load of people doing it. So I'm not actually sure what the stats are, but there's a lot of people going north this time that we met.
Yeah.
Much more than last time. But anyways, look, I think in the past it was kind of like you'd only ever see a couple of people going north at the same time. And so, of course, if you're going north, you're going to meet people every night, but you're probably going to be walking, like you'll cross people, but you're going to be walking more by yourself.
Yeah.
That was what it was when we first did it. I'm not as sure if that's true now.
Maybe it's changed.
But if you're walking south, you'll be walking at the same speed as some people and you'll be crossing the same people, quite a lot of the time. So if you like that, that's good. If you don't like that, maybe you could consider going the other way.
Yeah, I would say generally be kind to your body. Like you're asking a lot of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get injured on this thing, and it's not from like tripping over a rock, it's from overuse.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell.
Lots of injuries. We actually didn't have any, and I think it's partly because it wasn't our first sort of big long hike. That helps. And also because we took so much time off on our gigs, I think. So we had quite a bit of time to heal.
A lot of time to heal. Like, for example, even this time coming back, we'd been playing music a lot throughout COVID. So we were sort of sitting down doing these big projects and not really doing as much exercise. And we just sort of jumped right back into the hike with almost zero prep.
Yeah.
And we started on the Motatapu ranges, which are pretty pointy. And it was like 5 days.
Yeah.
And, my knees were aching by the end of it. And then things got a little bit flatter and that was okay, but my knees were still really sore. And then we did this week-long festival over New Year's and like ate our fill at this festival and like sat down and played. And then when we came back to it, my knees were fine. So it was like, it's so like it's the people that we see getting injured are the ones who are doing 40 Ks a day. Like,
and not taking those breaks, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's important. If you're doing the big days, you've got to give yourself rest days. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay. So one final question: where to next? Do you have another big adventure planned?
Woo! Yeah, we're thinking about it. You can tell.
Oh, really? Well, we want to go north. We want to go to the Northern Hemisphere. Like we want to go play music in the Northern Hemisphere. I think pretty much all of our sort of adventures going forward will always have some kind of like playing music and then going for a hike. How much we combine them like we did this one, I'm not sure. But the one that's been on our list actually for a while is the Pyrenees between Spain and France. You can go coast to coast. So we've sort of been eyeing that one off for a while.
It seems to be about 800 kilometres.
Yeah.
With peaks of like 3,000, which is terrifying. I've been practicing my Spanish throughout lockdown and I don't know, it seems doable.
Yeah, it certainly seems it's obviously less of a time commitment than the Te Araroa Trail.
Yeah.
So maybe we could go do a tour and then go do that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, it might be difficult, but when you're talking about a trail that's roughly 25 to 30% of the Te Araroa, you probably can afford to sort of do it over a shorter period and leave the instruments at home, sort of thing, or send them back home.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been talking with musicians Mickey and Michelle about their awesome adventure on the Te Araroa Trail in New Zealand. Mickey, Michelle, thanks for taking your time to talk with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us back again.
So that was the finish of Mickey and Michelle's Te Araroa adventure in New Zealand. Took a bit longer than they planned, I think. So really roughly around about 3 years by the time they started and finished it. But that's just the way that COVID has impacted on many people's hiking adventures over the last few years. And for me, I have this hike on my to-do list at some point. I think listening to Mickey and Michelle, they said the way people tend to succeed with most of the trips is to do them slowly and take plenty of rest days. And I think certainly as I'm getting a bit older, I think I probably will be not going as fast as I used to go. But it's a sort of journey or trip that I'm looking forward to.
Well, it's certainly one that's full of variety and, it's not just about walking, as they were talking about. I'm not so sure that I'm keen on all that water, though. That was quite a bit different to what we normally do and how we normally experience. So, when they were talking about following a particular river and having to cross it 6 or 7 times, and, your feet being permanently wet, that doesn't sound great. But I guess it's just part of the landscape and part of, the environment that you're walking in.
I must admit, I've lived in New Zealand and worked in New Zealand for a couple of years, and for some reason I did not associate the Te Araroa Trail with being wet. And I don't know why. I mean, New Zealand is not just one landscape. There are some areas that are very dry.
Quite dry, yeah.
There are some areas very wet, very snowy. It really depends on where you are. But really, from the description, it's almost a bit more like Tasmanian conditions, where you do expect rain, particularly when you're doing such a long journey. You're going to get rain. And New Zealand, at certain times of the year, I lived in Auckland, and I think the average rainfall was about 1,000 millimetres a year. So lots of water, and I just hadn't thought about that process.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. What struck me with this interview this time round is their energy and their enthusiasm, probably because they've finished, I guess. But, it was such a good thing that they went back and completed it, and was certainly I guess part of an important mission that they had, and they did seem as if they had really enjoyed it. And perhaps when we spoke to them, they'd only been hiking a little while, I guess, pre-COVID. So maybe the best things were yet to come, but. And coupled with that sense of achievement, I think, they were very upbeat.
Yeah. I mean, they started on what they were saying, the 29th of September 2019, and they ended up finishing the trail roughly towards the beginning of March. So they and I suppose in some respect it's almost, what's better, to get knocked off trail just after you've started, or get knocked off trail when out of a 3,000 kilometre trail, you've only got 400 odd kilometres to go. And yet they obviously decided it was an important process to go through and finish. The other thing was, as you would have listened to in the previous episode 124, is that Michelle has osteoporosis, and she's not that old. She was diagnosed at 23, and it's a disease you tend to associate with older people. But to get it at a younger stage, which means she particularly has to be careful of how hard she pushes her body and making sure she listens to the signs and signals and takes rest when need be. But she's completed a trip that most people will never likely do those sort of distances. And she, while it took a while, it's a pretty good achievement.
Oh, it's an excellent achievement. And, most people won't have osteoporosis to contend with and still are not out there doing this. So, that's pretty inspirational, I think.
And Mickey, as we talked in the last episode, Mickey said he broke his toe not long before the trip and only started a couple of weeks after Michelle did. And this is the issue. I mean, toes are one of those, if you break an arm or break your leg, you think, okay, I know this is going to impact me, but toes are such small bones. They can have such a major impact because pretty much your whole body weight tends to go on them, and you're using your toes for balance to a great extent. Yeah,
and there's not much you can do to help them heal, but I have walked, I've done a long hike with a broken toe. I'm just strapped it to the other toes and kept going. Probably I think I describe it as walking on Nurofen. But yeah, it's not ideal. But if you have to, I guess you do it. But yeah, that was even before he got started, I guess. So
in talking to them, I think the thing that I learned most out of this trip, I mean, you expect insects, that's fine. And they said that was certainly an issue. I tend to hike in long sleeves and long pants. And particularly having lived in New Zealand, I'd be inclined to wear a lycra glove anyway, even if it's just a fingerless glove. And I'd certainly be carrying an insect net for my head. I think the flies would really drive me insane if I didn't. That sort of thing I was expecting. The people Mickey and Michelle mentioned were really, it was a really nice place, really good people that, really caring people that are generally interested in what they were doing. And that's what I found living in New Zealand, that New Zealand really is a country of really nice people overall.
Yeah, and wasn't it fantastic that, they could get a free ride for their instruments, the harp and the violin, and they'd be there by the time they got to the next stop point. And, as they were saying, I guess people who'd paid to go to a folk concert were probably a reasonably particular kind of group, and probably absolutely thrilled, I would imagine, that they could have helped out and they could be part of the music industry for they could be roadies for just a short time.
One thing I hadn't thought of, and again, as much as I have this on my bucket list, I've by no means started the planning process. I just hadn't thought about lambing season. You think, okay, you can just, particularly if you're starting up in the north, you can pretty much start, it's more about hitting the South Island at the right time of the year in relation to the snowfalls. But I just hadn't thought about impacting on farms and lambs. And given the sheep industry is such a large part of New Zealand's rural economy, I just hadn't thought about it. So, this walk does go through farming areas and across farmland. So you certainly don't want to hit the farms during lambing season. So it really tends to be, by the sound of it, you're starting rough. I think from what Mickey and Michelle said was around about September. And if you're planning on going October, November, December, January, February, March, April, that's 7 months, and even May, 8 months, and that should get you through without missing the snowfall. I'd probably be inclined to finish a bit earlier than May, but certainly you've got that ability. And that's really your limitations on both ends of the trails. The lambing season on one end, the snow on the other, and how you get around both of those mechanisms. And by the sound of it, you don't want to start in the South Island because the mountains are definitely serious mountains, not what we really get here in Australia.
Yeah, I guess you'd want to get used to the walking and work up, as it were, work up to the mountains. The other thing that they were, came to mind when they were talking about the lambing season was, the land that you're walking through is owned by all sorts of different people as well. So, being aware of that and understanding what you can do. When they were talking about that stretch of 40-something kilometres where you can't camp. So, the alternative is to, hire a bike and travel at a different speed, and, be a little bit creative and aware of the environment that you're wandering through.
One final comment I'd make here, and again, if you've listened to the whole episode and got to this point, you would have heard Mickey and Michelle talking about doing some river travel and canoes for a period, and also having to cross either on foot 48 kilometres in a day because you weren't allowed to camp, or you get on, you have your packs taken the 48 kilometres and get on a bicycle and go through and go that way. From a purist perspective, is it a hike? Possibly not, but certainly, they certainly walked the majority of that entire trail.
Well, it's certainly a journey and an adventure, and I guess for that kind of distance, there wouldn't be too many places where you could just walk end to end, and if I guess being a little bit challenging here, if you've got to cross a river and you have to get in a boat to do it, is that a hike? So, let's not be too extreme about it, but it's just part of the journey, and it adds, I think, to the flavour and the interest.
Yeah, so if, at some stage you plan on doing this hike, there certainly is a lot of planning to go through and do, but, taking into account things that, it does include other modes of travel unless you are up for walking 48 kilometres in a day. And again, walking along do you walk along the river for multiple days or do you travel down the river? And again, that's a decision only you can make. It really is your hike, and as the saying goes, hike your own hike.
Yeah, and I think do the planning, absolutely, but also be a little bit flexible and be prepared to take advantage of what comes along any particular part of the hike and on any particular day.
Okay, we hope you've enjoyed this interview with Mickey and Michelle as they finished off their journey on New Zealand's long trail, the Te Araroa. Hopefully, as I said, at some point I will get the opportunity to do this trip myself. So many trails, so many hikes to do, but at some stage...
So little time.
So little time. At some stage, I'm hoping to get there. Okay, that's all for this week. Bye for now.
And bye from me.